This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Bruschi.
We are talking with Scott Roeder of Evidence Room and the podcast Crime Scene Time Machine. Talking about the case of Lori Vallow Daybell. A lot of developments this week, from the hair on the duct tape around JJ's mouth to the neighbors coming out and talking about what they observed, the podcast audio. I'm going to throw it out to you, Scott, because there's a lot of things to examine here, and specifically from your point of view as an evidence guy, what has been standing out to you?
Well, I mean, I think that the fact that the young boy JJ was found with duct tape around his wrists, I believe, also duct tape on his mouth, with a plastic bag on his head, which was also duct taped, is a clear indication, obviously, of forcible asphyxia and strangulation. There was also, I think, evidence that Lori's hair was found on the duct tape, which clearly points out that he was strangled, or restrained, possibly strangled, resisted, and was asphyxiated. Now, that I think is very compelling because it's very solid from a forensic standpoint. Now, you look at that compared to the daughter that was found, where there's really no indication of how she died. Even based on the dismemberment, it wasn't in the areas that you would expect with joints and so forth. So we don't know. But then we go to Tammy, where the medical examiner indicated that she was asphyxiated. And I think that's extremely compelling, that we have two of the three victims were killed in the same manner. Where they were restrained and asphyxiated to death. I think that is, right in line with a modus operandi, a style of killing that Lori and her, husband, I think, implemented possibly on all three of those victims.
It starts to show a pattern of behavior to a certain extent. And I'd be curious to know other individuals around them who had passed, if there's ever a way I know some have been cremated and such, so there's not necessarily the option to go back at the autopsies and take a look at some of these things, but it seems they kind of found a system from what we're looking at and employed it. I want to talk about the hair a little bit.
It's a tricky thing because asphyxia can happen in a number of different ways. It can happen through a heart failure. It can happen through a drug overdose, and it could happen through a manual strangulation. It could happen through the inability simply to inflate your lungs through compression, or being put into a particular body position where you mechanically can't reinflate your lungs. And it really is the most diabolical. I think I might have mentioned this before. A friend of mine is a forensic pathologist. We had discussed, what is the worst, most painful way to die. And, he indicated asphyxia because, ultimately, you're conscious of your imminent death while it's happening until the moment that you pass out. And, it really is a cowardly way to go. For whoever's, putting that on the victim, just tragedy. But it definitely shows a pattern that these two horrific individuals implemented on their, murderous path for whatever reason.
I want to talk about the hair a little bit. Obviously, her DNA was found. The hair was there. They did the DNA match. It was like a 1 in 72 million, or was it billion? Million, I believe, a match to that. And it was just interesting to me when you just think logically about duct tape. And I brought this up to other people too. And I'm curious as to the weight that you think that this piece of evidence holds. Obviously, there's plenty of damning things. This would be one thing that possibly puts her at the scene. But if you are walking around your house, you go to grab the roll of duct tape from the junk drawer, assuming that maybe they just used duct tape. Could have been brand new. Who knows? Maybe it was from the junk drawer. If I were to go to the junk drawer right now in my house, and I am bald, mind you, I am sure you will probably find a hair of mine somewhere on that roll of duct tape, usually on the edge once it gets kind of, it's been there for a while. So you'd probably find something there just because it's been used, it's been handled, it's been around life for so long. So in your estimation, how much weight does that hold? It looks damning on the surface, but again, if it's used or if it's duct tape that's been sitting around, I would think almost anybody in that household that touched the duct tape may have their DNA on it.
Well, I mean, you may have your DNA on it, but to have a hair on it, I mean, it is duct tape, it is sticky. It's not incontrovertible evidence that she was physically there at the time. However, considering the totality of the circumstances, you're not going to convict somebody on one hair on one piece of duct tape. But when you look at it in the bigger picture of the case, that it's still there. I mean, I'd like to know where on that duct tape. Was it on the hands? Was it on the mouth? Mm-hmm. Was it around the legs? Was it around the bag? I think a lot of that is extremely important as well. Like I said, by itself, it's compelling. It's mm-hmm. not incontrovertible. But when you include it in with we've heard that, the term, the straw that breaks the camel's back. Not each individual straw by itself mm-hmm. is going to be the nail in the coffin, as it were. But it's just one more in a long line of evidence that's damning for her personal involvement in the killing of her kids and possibly even Tammy.
Would it matter where on the duct tape the hair is found? I mean, for example, what I'm talking about is the fringe edges of it, where, if it's in a mm-hmm. junk drawer, stuff will get stuck to it. But if it's like flat out in the middle of the roll on a piece, that's been unrolled, that to me would show more likelihood that the person was actually present, because how else would that piece technically get on that area of the tape? I'm sure there's ways, if it's on the edge, it could get stuck down in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, you're the evidence guy. Does that make a difference? Would that may be an arguable point in court as far as where the hair was found physically on the rectangle of tape that was used?
Well, I think so. I think so. I think you're right. If the hair is, along the edges, but you have to remember, this is a violent situation where this person where the child wasn't duct taped after they were killed, because you would not need to duct tape somebody after they were killed. You're going to do that as a measure to restrain them so that you can kill. And mm-hmm. I think that the fact that, if the duct tape was found, amongst several wrappings, I think that's extremely prejudicial to her physically being there and possibly participating in the killing herself. So I think it's significant. It's not, it's not something that, I would come into court with just that evidence by itself, but I think it's pretty damning that it was there. It puts her in the physical location of the children. There's so much other evidence indicating that she was involved in this. I think this is just, for me, one of the pieces that puts it over the top.
This is an examination of the hidden human condition.
This is the Hidden Killers Podcast
with Tony Bruschi.
Scott Roeder of Evidence Room, thank you so much for joining us. And if you want to check out his podcast, it's called Crime Scene Time Machine. Lots of interesting stories on there. If you like this podcast, be sure to press subscribe wherever you download podcasts. You don't miss any breaking updates or discussions on the cases we're following for you. I'm Tony Bruschi. Stay with us.